Hey guys, so today I'm going to be doing the reading of Xerath's new lore that got put up. This has been redone along with all the other Shurima characters that are being released. I'm assuming leading up until Talia's release, as they both are from Shurima. So we'll go ahead and do Xerath the Magius Ascendant. A lifetime as a slave has prepared me for an eternity as your master. Xerath was an ascended Magius of the ancient Shrima, a being of arcane energy writhing with broken shards of a magical sarcophagus. For millennia he was trapped beneath the desert sands, but the rise of Shrima freed him from his ancient prison. Driven insane with power, he now seeks to take what he believes is rightfully his and replace the upstart civilizations of the world with one fashioned in its image. The boy who would eventually be called Xerath was born a nameless slave in Shurima's thousands of years ago. He was the son of captured scholars and the only prospect of endless servitude ahead. His mother taught him letters and numbers, while his father told him tales of history in hopes that such skills would allow him a better life. The boy vowed that he would not end up bent-backed and whipped like every other slave. When the boy's father was crippled during the excavations for the foundations of a monument to the emperor's favorite horse and left to die on the site of the accident, fearing her son would suffer a similar fate, the boy's mother begged the esteemed tomb architect to take him on as an apprentice. Though at first reluctant, the architect was impressed by the boy's eye for detail and innate understanding of mathematics and language, and accepted. The boy never saw his mother again. He was a swift learner, and his master dispatched him on errands to the great library of Nasus to retrieve specific texts on plans on a daily basis. On one trip, the boy met Azir, the least favorite son of the emperor. Azir was struggling to read a difficult passage in an ancient text, and despite knowing that talking to royalty was to invite death, the boy paused to help the young prince with his complex grammar. At that moment, a tentative friendship was established, and over the coming months that friendship only grew stronger. Though slaves were forbidden names, Azir gave one to the boy. He named him Xerath, which means one who shares, though that name was only ever spoken between the two boys. Azir saw to it that Xerath was appointed to his household slaves and made him his personal attendant. Their shared love of knowledge saw them devour texts from the library and become close as brothers. Xerath was Azir's consistent companion, learning all he could from his new proximity to culture, power, and knowledge, finally daring to dream that Azir might one day free him. On an annual tour of the Emperor's dominion, assassins struck the royal cavern and spent the night in a well-known oasis. Xerath saved Azir from the assassin's blade, but Azir's brothers were all slain, leaving the young prince a heartbeat away from Shurima's throne. As a slave, Xerath could expect no reward for his deed, but Azir promised that one day they would be brothers. In the wake of the assassination attempt, Shurima endured years of horror and fear of the Emperor's retribution. Xerath knew enough about history and the workings of the Shuriman court to understand that Azir's life hung by the slenderest of threads. That he was the heir to the throne meant nothing, for the Emperor hated Azir for living while his more beloved sons died. Of more immediate danger, the Emperor's wife was still young enough to bear children, and thus as far had borne many healthy sons. The odds were good that she would be able to produce another male heir for her husband, and as soon as she did, Azir's life was forfeit. Though Azir was a scholar at heart, Xerath persuaded him that to survive he must also learn to fight. This Azir did. In return, the young heir elevated Xerath, insisting that he continue his education. Both youths excelled, and Xerath proved that he was an exceptionally gifted pupil, one who took the pursuit of knowledge with gusto. Xerath became Azir's confidant and right-hand man, a position unheard of for a mere slave. This position gave him great, and some said undue, influence over the young prince, who came to rely on Xerath's judgment more each day. Xerath bent his every effort into seeking out knowledge wherever he could find it, no matter the cost, no matter the source. He unlocked long-sealed libraries and delved into forgotten vaults and consulted with mystics entombed deep within the stands, all to further his knowledge and ambition, both of which grew with unchecked rapidity. Whenever the whispers around the court spoke of him devolving into unsavory places it grew too loud to ignore, he would find cunning means to silence them. That Azir never mentioned these whispers was, to Xerath, a tact of approval as to how he was keeping his emperor safe. Years passed, and Azir took even darker steps to keep the emperor's wife from carrying a child to term, using his incessant magical abilities to corrupt every infant in the wound. Without rivals to the throne, Azir would be safe. When rumors of a curse arose, Xerath ensured that they were never spoken again, and ofttimes those who had voiced such suspicions vanished without a trace. By now, Xerath's desire to escape his roots as a slave became a burning ambition to achieve power of his own, though he had justified every murderous act by telling himself that he was going to keep his friend alive. Despite Xerath's best efforts to thwart the queen's midwives, a new prince of Shurima was brought into the world, but on the night of his birth Xerath used his growing magical powers to summon the elemental spirits of the deep desert and craft a terrible storm. Xerath brought a bolt after bolt of lightning down on the queen's chambers, reducing it to a burning rubble and killing the queen and her newborn son. The emperor rushed to the queen's chambers only to be confronted by Xerath and his hands ablaze with arcane power. The emperor's guards attacked, but Xerath burned them and the emperor to cindered skeletons. Xerath ensured that the mages of a conquered territory were to blame for the deaths, and Azir's first act upon the throne was to lead a brutal campaign of retribution against his people. Azir was crowned emperor of Shurima, and with Xerath at his side, the boy who had once been a nameless slave. Xerath had long dreamed of this moment and expected Azir to end slavery in Shurima before finally naming his brother. Azir did none of these things, continuing to expand his empire's borders and deflecting Azir's overtures regarding the end of slavery. To Xerath, this is further proof of Shurima's moral bankruptcy. He raged at Azir's breaking his promise. Azir's face was thunderous as he reminded Xerath that he was a slave and that he should remember his place. Something once noble died in Xerath that day, but he bowed with supplication, outwardly accepting Azir's decision. As Azir continued his campaigns of conquest, Azir remained at his side, but every action was carefully designed to increase his influence over a realm he now planned to take for himself. To steal an empire was no small thing, and Xerath knew he needed more power. The famous legend of Renekton's ascension revealed that a mortal did not have to be chosen by the Sun Priest and that anyone could rise up. So Xerath plotted to steal the power of the ascension. No slave could ever stand upon the sun disk, so Xerath fed to the emperor's vanity, inflating his ego and filling his head with impossible visions of a world-spanning empire. But such a dream could only be possible if Azir could ascend the greatest heroes of Shurima before him. In time, Xerath's perseverance paid off, and Azir announced that he would undertake the ascension ritual. He had earned the right to stand along Gnosis and Renekton as an ascended being. The Sun Priest protested, but such was Azir's hubris that he ordered them to comply on pain of death and torture. The day of ascension arrived, and Azir marched toward the dais of ascension with Xerath at his side. Gnosis and Renekton were absent from the day's events, for Xerath had arranged a distraction for them by weakening the seal on a magical sarcophagus containing the beast of living fire. When the creature finally broke its bindings, Renekton and Gnosis were the only warriors capable of defeating it. Thus Xerath had stripped Azir of the only two beings who might save him from what was to come. Azir stood beneath the sun disk, and in the final moments before the priest began the rituals, events took a turn that Xerath had not anticipated. The Emperor turned towards Xerath and told him that he was now a free man. He and all Shurima's slaves were now released from their bonds of servitude. He embraced Xerath before naming him his eternal brother. Xerath was stunned, and he had been given everything he was desired, but the success of his plans hinged on Azir's death, and nothing was going to dissuade him from acting. Too many pieces were in motion, and Xerath had already sacrificed too much to turn back now, no matter how much that part of him wanted to. The Emperor's words pierced the bitterness enclosing Xerath's heart, but it came decades too late. Unaware of his peril, Azir turned to the priests and began the ritual and brought down the awesome power of the sun. With a roar of anger and grief combined, Xerath blasted Azir from his place on the dais, watching through tears as his former friend burned to ash. Xerath took Azir's place on the light, and the light of the sun filled him, reshaping his flesh into that of an ascended being. But the power of the ritual was not his to take, and the consequences of his betrayal of Azir were devastating. The unbound power of the sun all but destroyed Shurima, sundering its temples and bringing ruination upon the city. Azir's people were consumed in a terrifying conflagration as the desert rose up to claim the city. The sun disk fell, and the empire built by generations of empires was undone in a single day. Even as the city burned, Xerath held the sun priests in the grip of his magic, preventing them from ending the ritual. The energies filling him were immense, allowing his dark sorcery to create a being of invincible power. He drew even more of the sun's power into his body. His mortal flesh was consumed and remade as a glowing vortex of arcane power. With Xerath's treachery revealed, Renekton and Nasus rushed to the epicenter of the magical storm, destroying the city. They bore with them the magical sarcophagus that imprisoned the spirit of eternal fire. The Ascended Brothers fought their way to the dais of ascension as Xerath fell from the deadly radiance engulfing the city. Before the newly ascended Magius could react, they hurled his crackling body within the sarcophagus, sealing it once more with blessed chains and powerful sigils of binding. But it was not enough. Xerath's power was great as a mortal, and that power combined with the gift of ascension made him all but invincible. He shattered the sarcophagus, though its shards and chains remained bound to him. Renekton and Nasus hurled themselves at Xerath, but such was his newfound strength that he fought them both to a standstill. The battle raged throughout the collapsing city, destroying what had already sunk beneath the sands. The brothers were able to drag Xerath towards the Tomb of Emperors, the greatest mausoleum of Shurima. The vault whose locks and wards were impossible to break, and which only answered to the blood of emperors. Renekton wrestled Xerath within, and called upon Nasus to seal the vault behind him. Nasus did so with a heavy heart, knowing that it was the only way to prevent Xerath's escape. Renekton and Xerath fell into eternal darkness, and there they remained, locked in an endless battle as the once great civilization of Shurima collapsed. Uncounted centuries passed. In time, even Renekton's mighty strength waned, leaving him vulnerable to Xerath's influence. With poison lies and illusions, Xerath twisted Renekton's mind, filling him with misplaced bitterness towards Nasus, the faithless brother who had, in Xerath's vindictive narrative, abandoned him long ago. When the tomb of the emperors was finally discovered beneath the desert and broken open by Severe and Cassiopeia, both Xerath and Renekton were freed in an explosion of sand and rubble. Sensing his brother still lived, Renekton charged from the ruins, his distorted mind leaving him a little better than a savage beast. After an age lost to legend, Shurima was reborn and rose majestically from the desert. Xerath found another soul to return to life beneath the sand. One he thought was long dead. Azir was newly resurrected as one of the Ascended, and Xerath knew that there could be no peace for either of them while the other still lived. Xerath fought sought the heart of the desert to regain his strength, and somehow the world had changed in a millennia since his imprisonment. His stolen power grew with every passing moment, and he beheld a world ripe for conquest, a world brimming with mortals ready to worship at the feet of a new terrible god. And yet, for all his newfound power, however far he had come from the nameless slave boy, a part of Xerath still knows he's still in chains. This is Unbound. This was the moment, the singular moment that cost him so much, that had taken a lifetime of planning. A corrupt empire and its strutting princeling would be struck down under the blankly idiotic sun symbol that they both trusted. The key to immortality. Jealousy guarded and misery offended. This would be his alone. Stolen in front of the entire world. A singular moment of perfect vengeance that would finally free the slave known as Xerath. Though the master's helm revealed no human expression, and knowing that a lovingly etched metal could not respond in kind, Xerath smiled up at the soulless hawk face just the same, his joy genuine, and a life spent in servitude, first for a mad emperor and now a vain one. Endless manipulations for those against the throne. Near damning conquest for a barely remembered knowledge that had already consumed him. All of it led to this grotesque masquerade of the Ascension. The very word, when spoken out loud, was an assault. We will ascend, while you are chained and broken to the broken stone as the sands of time swallow you all. No, not any more, and never again. The chosen golden lords will not be taken into the sun's embrace and made gods. A slave will do this, a simple slave, a boy who had once had the misfortune to save a noble child from the sands. For his sins, Xerath had been punished with a horrible, maddening promise: freedom, unobtainable, forbidden. Should the thought even dart through the slave's mind, it would be punishable by death, as the Ascended could gaze past the flesh and bone and deep into one's very soul, and to see its dim traitorous glow. And yet there it was, spoken by the young princeling he dragged from the embrace of the mercurial mother desert. Azir, the golden sun, vowed that he would free his savior and his new friend. A promise unkept to this day, the words of a grateful child innocently oblivious to the impact that they would have. How could Azir upend thousands of years of rule? How could he fight tradition, his father, and destiny? In the end, the young emperor would lose it all by not honoring his word. So Xerath was elevated and educated, eventually becoming Azir's trusted right hand, but never a free man. The soured promise ate into what he was and what he could have been. Denied a small, simple thing, his right to live his life, Xerath decided to take everything. All of the things denied to him, and all of the things he deserved. The empire, ascension, and the absolute purest form of freedom possible. With each step taken towards the offensively grandiose dais of ascension, positioned respectfully behind his empire and flanked by the inept Centials who supposedly protected Shurima, Xerath felt an unknown lightness that he was generally shocked by. Was this joy? Does vengeance bring joy? The impact was almost physical. At that moment, the overwrought suit of gold and armor that his tormentor abruptly halted, and turned and walked towards Xerath. Could he know? How could he possibly know? This spoiled, self-obsessed boy, this righteous, falsely benevolent emperor, whose hands were just as bloody as Xerath's own. Even if he did, there was no staying the killing blow that was already in motion. Xerath had planned for every contingency. He had bribed, killed, outmaneuvered, and outplotted for decades. He even tricked the monstrous brothers Nasus and Renekton into staying away from the event, but he had not planned for this. The Emperor of Shurima, the Golden Sun, the beloved of Mother Desert, soon to be ascended, took off his helmet, revealed his proud brow and smiling eyes, and turned to his oldest and most trusted friend. He spoke about the love of brothers, the love of friends, and the hard fights won and the others lost, of family, of future, and finally of freedom. At these words the guards flanked Xerath, moving in, weapons drawn. So the princeling did know. Had Xerath's plan become undone? But the fools in armor were saluting. There was no menace to them, and they were honoring him. They were congratulating him on his freedom. His hated master had freed him. He had freed them all. No Shuriman would ever wear chains again. Azir's last act as human was to unfetter his people. The foundation-shuddering roar of the assembled masses drowned out any response Xerath could have had. Azir donned his helmet and strode onto the dais, the attendants preparing for the godhood that would never come. Xerath stood in the shadow of the monolithic sun disk, knowing the Emperor-destroying doom was seconds away. Too late, my friend. Too late, brother. Far too late for us all. So that is the end of Xerath's new lore. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I do think that these are getting really interesting. They're getting very interwoven with each other. With Xer and Xerath, and then Nessus and Renekton kind of interweaving together. So if you guys like this, I hope you leave a like and subscribe, and I hope everybody has a nice day.